But let's see. Good morning, and welcome to House of Sweden, and welcome to this conversation we're going to have today ahead of the Global Plastic Treaty negotiations in Ottawa in a couple of weeks. I know we have great speakers, both from civil society and our government, so thank you so much for coming and listening to them. First out, I would like to welcome Sweden's ambassador to the United States, Mr. Urban Ahlin, to give some opening remarks. Urban.
Thank you, Eva. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the House of Sweden and today's dialogue ahead of the upcoming fourth round of negotiations of the Global Plastic Treaty in Ottawa. You need to say Ottawa, you know that, right? Yeah, Ottawa. Yeah, not Ottawa as we say in Swedish, it's Ottawa. Like Toronto, right? Toronto. Have you seen that movie, this film about Toronto? And there are some American actors that says Toronto all the time. It's not, it's Toronto. Anyhow, it's Ottawa as well. Thank you to Earth Day organization and the delegation of the European Union to the United States for great collaboration planning this event. Glad that we can host this discussion here at House of Sweden during 2024, an important year when it comes to plastic and plastic pollution. And as part of the embassy's strategic theme, Pioneer the Possible. As you can see here, we have different themes for this year's activities. One is Pioneer the Possible when it comes to green transition, where, fighting against plastic pollution is, of course, one of them. But it's also about artificial intelligence. You have seen our exhibition maybe on the other floor here. And, of course, we are celebrating also our NATO membership from partner to ally. The meeting in Ottawa aims to get closer in the negotiations of a legally binding agreement on plastics. We hope that we can have a final agreement by the end of this year. Sweden takes, of course, an active role in these negotiations and would like to see an ambitious outcome. We need to adopt a treaty covering the whole life cycle of plastics that provide a possibility to develop legally binding measures and that can be strengthened over time. The treaty should include measures on primary plastic production, hazardous chemicals in plastics, and restrictions on problematic and avoidable plastic products. We need an agreement that is implementable and that creates a strong signal to the market and to the industry to take their responsibility for products put on the market. Sweden is ready to commit and work together with others in targeted outreach, for example, on issues such as problematic plastic products and chemicals of concern. For Sweden, measures in the beginning of the life cycle are a priority, because without such measures, we will never be able to handle the waste challenges that are so urgent in so many countries. We must start in the beginning and ensure that plastic products are reusable. Today's dialogue will include both government and civil society, and we hope these discussions will increase awareness and be an opportunity to exchange ideas and best practices on how we best can tackle these challenges and what needs to be done to secure an ambitious global plastic agreement. When you entered House of Sweden this morning, you saw the exhibition I spoke about, the artificial intelligence, and the focus is, of course, AI, health, society, and sustainability. Because of our AI focus in our diplomatic program, I decided to use a ChatGPT and see what would come up if I put in the prompt, speech legal plastic agreement. The result was pretty good. It did imply, though, that we had already reached the finish line. Not so good. And today we were going to sign the agreement. I know we have work to do still, but I decided to end with part of the AI-generated speech, again, to stress the urgency. Plastic pollution has reached alarming levels, infiltrating every corner of our planet, from the deepest trenches of the oceans to the highest peaks of our mountains. Plastic waste knows no boundaries. Its pervasive presence not only poses a threat to wildlife and ecosystems, but also jeopardizes human health and well-being. Plastic pollution knows no border, and neither can our response. By fostering collaboration among nations, we can amplify our impact and achieve meaningful progress on a global scale. Our planet and our future generations depend on it. So let's pioneer the possible. And on that note, it's my great honor to welcome to the podium the co-organizer of this event, Kathleen Rogers, the president of the Earth Day Network. You are welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Sweden. And before I begin, I just want to draw your attention. In a world kind of gone mad, I think we probably all agree that life's tough out there for all of us in every corner of the planet. I walked in here and saw this photo behind me, which looked real because I didn't have my glasses on. And then I started looking around, and some person from the Swedish embassy informed me that this is an exhibit of disabled children with Down syndrome and other disabilities, posing for what their dream position would be on the planet, what they wanted to be when they grew up or what they wanted to be now. And when you look at these photos, and there's another room, it just gives me a lot of hope. So I just want to congratulate Sweden for this extraordinary exhibit of hopefulness. It really hit the mark with me this morning. My organization has been around since 1970. The Dennis Hayes and Gaylord Nelson, a U.S. senator, got together and turned what was known as an environmental teach-in to sort of take advantage of the unrest in the world, or in the U.S., around the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement and the indigenous movement, all of which were happening simultaneously. They got together and created eventually something called Earth Day that brought 20 million people, more than 10% of our population, out on the streets. It still remains the largest non-faith-based event in human history. Needless to say, seeing all those people, and the media back then was much smaller, a handful of television stations and fewer newspapers, treated it almost reverentially. They could not believe what happened. And the members of Congress and the president of the time, Nixon, became very worried about what they saw. And in quick succession, they passed laws that were focused on human health. Before 1970, it was largely a conservation movement that was focused on national parks and wildlife and hunting, but it moved dramatically across this line and became about human health. 150 years of industrial development had left this place trashed. You couldn't see across the street in LA. During rush hour, our rivers were on fire, children were disabled, birth defects. And so they passed these incredible laws, one right after the next, from 70 to 78, the honeymoon period of the environmental movement. But it spawned environmentalism worldwide and became, it really makes sort of a red line where they crossed it, and environment became also about human health, which is, of course, what we're talking about today, among other things, when we're talking about plastics. Earth Day created a campaign. We have a theme every year, and this one is called Planet versus Plastics. And we chose that after a lot of deliberation because it is a monumental problem that we all face. We're particularly focused on human health, and we've put out one report. Others are following. The first one is Babies versus Plastics, to show the impact of what's happening to our children, from what they're drinking and eating and how it's being absorbed to the placentas that they were developed in. Everything is covered in plastic. And the plastic load that our children have right now in their bodies is much less than what I have because I'm much older. And so we're also tracing that projection of what the body load of children and others will be from plastics in general. As you know, plastics is an incredibly useful material. It has spawned hundreds of billions of dollars in development and money for the fossil fuel industry and plastic developers. And half of our life is built on plastic. So we have to take it seriously. And now we have this great opportunity to do something about it in the Plastics Treaty. And we are. It is a slow time at the moment for it, but we have great hope, and the people in this room that I've spoken with also have great hope. So I'd like to welcome to the stage our speakers on the panel. If you want to come up. You're all mic'd up, right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, our first speaker will be Mario Morales Lopez. He is the first Secretary of Diplomatic Career, and he is at the Embassy of Panama to the United States, a wonderful country. At the embassy, his portfolio includes education, science, technology, innovation, and he maintains contact and relationships with the Department of State and federal agencies, including NASA, NSF, NOAA, as well as universities and organizations such as the Group on Earth Observations. He's had many different jobs in his wonderful career with Panama and also worked in the private sector. I'd like to welcome you to speak, and you can stay where you are. If you want to go to the podium, you can. Whatever you prefer.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation. First, apologize from Ambassador Martinez that he is feeling sick since yesterday. Maybe the spring is coming. Okay, for Panama, it's an honor and pleasure to participate in this event. Panama is a carbon negative country, and the binomial from plastic and human health is very critical for us. We are declared 54% of marine territory as marine protected area, and the plastic is one of the biggest issue in pollution of our sea. For Panama, the sea is source of life, economic resources. So we are decided to participate. It's a commitment of country to participate in all initiatives to get a binding legal instrument in fight to plastic pollution. And today we hope to explain a little more about the action of Panama in this respect. Thank you.
So our other three panelists, if you can also speak about 5 minutes, we have a really tough 5-minute timekeeper over there. The next speaker is Manuel Carmona Yerba, the Deputy Head of Section for Global Issues and Innovation and Counselor for Environment and Oceans Delegation of the European Union to the United States. He manages relationships between the European Union and the US on issues ranging from nature conservation to pollution, circular economy, very big these days, plastics, oceans, and fisheries, and has multiple degrees from the University of Leicester. Previously worked at the European Commission on other areas, including UNFCCC negotiations, which we're very happy for, and the links between ocean and environmental issues.
Thank you. Do you hear me well? Yes? Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in spite of the total eclipse. That is a major attraction today. So you haven't traveled, you're here, and I'm glad that you are here. We're going to talk about plastics. But why is plastics a big deal? Well, since the 50s, I think the figure is around 8.6 billion with B tons of plastics that we have produced in this world. 60% of those have ended up in landfills or have ended up worse even in the environment, in our oceans, in the waterways, in land. They are everywhere. 8.6 billion tons. We're talking about, I made the calculations this morning, kind of nerd, comparing weights. 90 aircraft carriers that we put out there. Plastic is pretty light. I mean, if you compare with glass is pretty heavy. Plastic is light. You put plastic in the proportion of 90 aircraft carriers, it's quite a lot of stuff. Anyway, it's not only that, it's also transboundary. And that is where a global plastics agreement becomes absolutely necessary, because this cannot be handled by a country alone. In the European Union, we have a lot of experience on these, scaling up policies so that, a specific European country cannot solve many problems. It's at the heart of what the European Union is. We get together 27 countries and we work together to solve issues that cross borders inevitably, as part also of a single market. So the market and the environment policies are very much linked. And in circular economy and plastics, this is particularly evident. Anyway, so for us, the plastics agreement has become a priority. Priority, I wouldn't say number one because there are many, but it's a priority certainly in the environmental field. Now, why is that? It's polluting everything all over the world. Now they found microplastics in clouds. We were hearing about health issues that are exploding. You know, the knowledge that we have about accumulation of microplastics in our brains, in placentas, and all our tissues. We certainly don't want that. You know, the idea of having little particles accumulating rapidly in our tissues. So for us, it's a priority. The global treaty for us should aim at ending plastic pollution, not necessarily ending plastic. And there, you know, we talk more about use of plastic rather than material, demonize a material. Material has its uses and will always have its uses, like in the medical field. But certainly some of the uses of plastics are absurd and noxious to human health. And those certainly need to be tackled urgently. We need to tackle plastic pollution from a life cycle perspective, and that means looking upstream as well as downstream. So far, the world, I would say, is looking or has looked more into downstream recycling, waste management. We need to look at the production. We need to look at the design. We need to look at all these stages. This is where complexity comes in on one hand, but where solutions need to be found. We cannot ignore the fact that, you know, the design of a product carries with it 80% of the environmental impact. You know, we have to be tackled at source. Another important element in the EU's position in the Global Plastics Agreement, apart from this life cycle element, is that we need obligations that are global, combined as well with national action. As to how this is going to unfold, that's one of the core issues that we have open in the negotiations. But certainly we do want to see, for example, in plastic production caps, a cap that is obligatory for the world. We need to reduce this absurd amount of plastic production. The trends are doubling and tripling in 15 years. This is not tenable. And I'm going to end there. Sorry, just go on. I know I can't go on and on. I'm sorry about that. We prioritize also connection with SDGs. For example, 12, 13, 14, 15, life on land, life on below the sea, sustainable production and consumption. It's important, this connection, because it's part of a whole. And we absolutely want to have this finished by 2024, end of this year, as much as others around the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Deepur Okusaga. He is the head of Energy, Climate, and Program Management for the British Embassy. He is a British diplomat focusing on energy, climate, and serves as the head of Energy and Climate at the British Embassy in DC. Prior to his posting here, he held positions as head of Energy and Climate, Middle East and North Africa at the UK government's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, where he focused on energy security and the energy transition in the MENA area. So welcome.
Great, thank you very much. So I'll cut part of my speech short. I think you've given quite a lot of the background on where we are currently with the plastic problem. But the UK has tried to be a leading voice in this avenue. When Rwanda and Peru came up with the proposal, the UK was proud to be a co-sponsor of the move forward at the UN Environment Assembly in February 2022. As well with our EU partners and other high ambition colleagues, the UK stands as one of the founding members of the High Ambition Coalition, which is a couple of countries coming together to actually make sure we can push as much as possible to get the best treaty possible and also get to a point by 2040. We'll be in a place where we have, strong targets to ensure that, plastic pollution is reduced. So UK position to date, we support and are pushing as much as possible for a very ambitious agreement that covers the whole life cycle of plastics from the beginning of production all the way to recycling. And we want this treaty to actually be the standing force that actually moves to end or reduce plastic as much as possible. We believe in terms of should this be legally binding, we want to have an overarching high-level international goal, but we really want to keep on pushing for individual countries to have similar nationally determined positions in which they would come in and then work together to do what they can to achieve this high-level goal. So countries like the UK who can move faster than others, we can take a step forward and deliver, while other countries can have what their country can do to move forward. in line with the EU, as we discussed, production, we want to ensure that production is reduced to as much as feasible. The UK supports national targets on production also, bottom up from individual countries, and actually rolling that up. At the moment, we are also thinking quite heavily on the just energy transition for colleagues in the less developed countries who are doing a lot of work in this. And we really need to make in this INC4 negotiations quite a lot of progress in ensuring that we have the just energy just transition in line with ILO guidelines at the foundation of what we do. And we generally believe finance is needed. Hopefully we get to a point where we can have a global multilateral agreement, hopefully through the Global Environmental Facility, and we can kind of work together to kind of put as much finance as possible to ensure we can transition. So at the moment, we have at INC4, we have quite INC 123, quite a long treaty, about 70 pages. We need to cut it down. We need to be more concise. At the upcoming negotiations, we want to focus on getting the objectives of the treaty as concise as possible. We want to focus heavily on going on problematic plastic products. We want to ensure we focus on product design performance of plastics. We want to ensure that we look at pollution from fishing and aquaculture gear. And also, it's really important that we live here, and by the time we get to November, at the end of this year, have gotten to a place where we have a whole life cycle plastic treaty that takes into consideration individual country circumstances, and we can actually work to deliver.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rob Wing, who's Deputy Director of the Environmental Policy Office at U.S. Department of State. He is in the state's Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, OES. He works to coordinate development of U.S. foreign policy on a broad range of environmental issues, and those include air quality, chemicals and waste management, U.S. engagement with multilateral environmental organizations, and trade-related environmental cooperation. Prior to joining OES, Mr. Wing spent 9 years working at EPA in their Office of General Counsel. There he served as the primary staff attorney on domestic and international pesticide and toxic chemical initiatives. Rob, welcome.
Great, thank you so much, and it's such an honor to be here. I actually feel a little bit like I'm coming home here. My husband's family has a restaurant in Stockholm, and I've spent many time. I've been in Stockholm many times, probably more than 20 times, and I've spent a lot of time in this embassy. And you're right, the embassy does put on these amazing art installations on a regular basis, and so it's really nice to be back. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really honored. And it's really important for us to hear, it's also just really important for us to hear from civil society, hear from all of you about the negotiation and to get your input and to consult with you on where we should be headed in these negotiations. And it's important to compare notes. I feel like if we, the four of us in the room here, could sit down and negotiate this agreement, we might get to an endpoint in a pretty quick time frame. I almost could say ditto to everything that you guys said. Almost. So.
It's the almost that matters.
Yeah. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to implementing policies that will reduce plastic pollution significantly. At the State Department, we approach this issue from the global perspective by working on 3 avenues of action: advancing the international negotiation around the global agreement on plastic pollution, stakeholder engagement, and establishing a multi-stakeholder forum to support projects and exchange ideas to address pollution at all stages of the plastics life cycle. One of the biggest obstacles to reaching agreement, I think, on the global level is to ensure that we need to bridge differences between countries with opposing positions and keep the negotiations constructive, on track to reach consensus with all members to garner support for the international agreement. There's really a lot of differences now, and we really need to work to bridge those differences to get to a successful outcome. We have been engaging with civil society, industry, the science community, state and local governments, and tribal nations to take into account their perspectives in formulating our approach. Beyond the negotiations, the United States is spearheading the End Plastic Pollution International Collaborative, or EPIC, which convenes public and private sector partners to spur global multi-stakeholder action that will tackle plastic pollution head-on. EPIC is a public-private partnership led by the United States with membership from a number of NGOs and other countries in the private sector, and it's aimed at utilizing the latest technologies and scientific approaches to reducing plastic waste, as well as creating a forum for stakeholders to exchange knowledge and information and best practices. If I have time, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. I have 2 minutes left? Okay. So now I'll talk a little bit more about our negotiations. We seek an ambitious and inclusive global agreement on plastic pollution with meaningful and feasible universal obligations and flexibilities for parties to prioritize their most pressing problems. Parties should reduce plastic pollution throughout the life cycle of plastics, from upstream to downstream. National action plans should outline how a party will implement obligations and facilitate reporting. Systemic change is needed, with countries working together to take action throughout the full life cycle of plastics, including product design, waste management. Waste management and recycling alone are not enough to address this global problem. The successes of the future instrument will determine not only what it says, but also who it includes. The agreement should have universal membership, including every country that is a major producer or consumer of plastic. This includes the United States, because we are a part of the problem and we must be part of the solution. The US is committed to working to finalize the text by the end of 2024. I'm glad that we've all agreed on that. We want an instrument that the United States and other major producers and consumers can join. We will not be able to achieve success unless we all, national and subnational governments, the private sector, civil society, indigenous communities, academics, and other citizens work together. And agreeing, as I said earlier, agreeing on the final text will be challenging. There's a wide spectrum of views on how to be ambitious in combating plastic pollution. And I want to say, I think we all have the same ambition. We want to end plastic pollution. That's our ambition. And I think the issue is figuring out how we're gonna get there and what we need to do now. But we need to start. So agreeing on the final text will be challenging. There's a wide spectrum of views, ranging from bottom-up voluntary approaches to hard obligations on eliminating or reducing problematic polymers, chemicals, and additives, and banning products. At INC4, we will need to make progress towards converging on the elements of the instrument. This will include the members finding a way to refine, streamline the options where they do not have agreement. One of the most important decisions of INC4 will be agreeing on intersessional work. We can't just do this during the INCs. We've got to work in the middle of the INCs too, so that when we get to INC5, we're in a place to really reach agreement on the final text. We expect to play an important role in the US on building bridges between different country approaches. And we're looking forward to I'm looking forward to answering any questions. So maybe I'll stop there.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the way this will work, I have 4 questions that we developed, and then we'll open it to the floor. So I think the first one, and you can all answer, you can choose not to answer, but I hope you all will say something about these. We all know from recent studies that plastic recycling as a solution to the crisis has been totally and widely discredited by an industry that spent decades having us believe that it would work. At most, 5 to 8% of plastics can be recycled. At the same time, we've learned that microplastics and additive chemicals used to make them are associated with a wide range of human health issues, from Alzheimer's to autism, cancer, particularly in people under 40, childhood development issues, heart disease, strokes. So is this treaty at its heart a plastic waste issue or a human health issue? Or is it both? And how strongly should the treaty address human health issues specifically, and is that realistic? Who wants to go first? Rob.
I think it's both. I mean, we support an objective in the treaty that protects human health and the environment from plastic pollution. I mean, you really need to address both parts of it. It's not an either or. It's not an either or issue. You need to focus on human health and the environment, and that's what we're supporting. We're supporting an objective that does both. I'll just stop there. Simple. Yeah.
I think from the UK position, we are looking at it from human health and also view. But one of the main things we want to push as much as possible is actually building that evidence gap. And loads of people are making a lot of statements based on fact, but we need to really do a lot more to actually make sure that as we speak and link cancer, Alzheimer's, and other illnesses to plastics, we have the most research behind that. So the UK is looking to work with like-minded countries to actually investigate this so that we can put the information out there as much as possible. We support still actually supports a circular economy way. So as well as doing a lot of research, we at the moment feel that we should continue to push countries to be as circular as possible with their production, and not only recycle, but try as much as possible to reduce and eliminate as much as possible the production of plastics. So that is where we are at the moment. A lot of work on circular economy of plastics, but quite a lot of work on the evidence gap and making sure we're actually supporting as much as possible the research behind it. So when we make we have conversations and we say, plastic causes X or Y, we have a robust scientific database behind that can show the link.
Yes, about the problem of waste or human health, we consider that it's both. And related to the strong of treaty of plastic, we consider that the treaty of plastic must be as strong as the prevention pandemic prevention treaty that is in negotiation right now in the World Health Organization. And the last pandemic showed the vulnerability of the human to health risk. But in the case of COVID-19, the COVID was a surprise. The COVID was a virus. And finally, we can overcome using vaccine. But in the case of diseases caused by plastic, we can get out with vaccine. We need strong action to mitigate and stop the plastic pollution in all areas. We consider Panama support the Biden instrument in all aspects.
It's, I think, health. I mean, this is, I think it's both a waste and a health problem indeed. But generally, it's just, environment and health are kind of the same thing, right? We have in Europe developed the concept of, it's not Europe that has developed it, but we have certainly embraced it, of One Health. I mean, whatever damages our environment, it will end up damaging us. I mean, this is, clear. So using the planet as a toilet, the way we're doing it right now, like throwing everything out there, generally is going to come back to haunt us. In this context of the Global Plastics Agreement, we got what they call the substances of concern. These are toxic additives. Some have estimated around 13,000 of them in plastic production nowadays, because they perform in a different way, so you adapt the polymers of plastics to different uses that are interesting. There's not much transparency of those, and I think the Global Plastics Agreement needs certainly to at least achieve transparency worldwide. These are toxins flowing all over the planet, in part of the global trade, and finally entering our bodies in the form of microplastics. We don't know much about it, so transparency is going to be crucial. But there are ways. I mean, the good news is there are ways to do this. In the Circular Economy Action Plan that we have in Europe, and in the legislation that we've been putting together, for example, the eco-design, the packaging waste directive, many other legal instruments, we're trying to develop what they call the digital passport, digital product passport, where you would have, in digital form, all the elements, all the composing toxic additives or whatever that are in a product, and everybody in the value chain would have access to that. Of course, you have to kind of articulate that with privacy. You have to articulate that with commercial secrets as well. So it's not as easy as it sounds, like we put everything in a digital format that can be read easily. But this is where we're going in search of transparency. And then tackling also the toxic additives. Some of them will need to be phased out, as simple as that, banned, and hopefully in a global way, so they don't end up being in the global trade. This could be an annex to the treaty, for example. This could be criteria that identify at a later stage what are those additives. So there are certain possibilities, but certainly this is a top issue for the EU to tackle the substances of concern. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think this is a civil society question because there are many members of the general public and civil society groups that really want to understand this. Why have world governments allowed so much power to be given to the petrochemical industry in these negotiations? And people have seen the pictures where oil-producing countries are huddled with the petrochemical industry during these negotiations. Why are they allowed to participate at the same level or even higher than civil society members who are representing the people who are most affected, although we all are, by the dangers of plastic? How can we make that civil society on an even playing field with the petrochemical industry?
I can start. So these conversations and participation in multilateral negotiations has been quite a topical issue. We saw the same thing at COP28 with petrol states hosting it, and loads of people were upset about why do they have a seat at the table, why do they get to make the decisions if they cause all the problems. But we were able to get quite that was this last COP on energy and climate was the first time we got fossil fuels in the text. And I don't think if we didn't have a fossil fuel CEO leading it, we would have been able to make such progress. So in my opinion, and the UK opinion, participation is key. Civil society is very, very, very important. But also, we can't make these decisions without having the people who we would force or make to make these updates and changes. They need to be on the table. They need to be able to speak to us. And as we come up with ideas, they need to explain what is deliverable, what is not deliverable. So we want an ambitious decision. We're quite keen that we are as transparent as possible, inclusive as possible, and make sure that we have both civil society, the business community in the rooms. But just to kind of be very clear, the INC process, the negotiations themselves are happening with countries. So, we consult widely, but only member countries are negotiating. And so the main work is being done from country to country, but generally we consult widely, as everybody would expect us to do, with yourselves, with people who are within the whole life cycle and the whole value chain.
Petrochemical corporation as generator of employment and economical growth put in the negotiation table, but not as a more important actor, obviously. I think that every actor in the negotiation must operate in equal condition, and the civil society role is very important. But the key point maybe is get a consensus, because every day the awareness about sustainability and environmental responsibility is greater, and petrochemical industry is taking note about that. Civil society is better organized and work better in negotiation. Today we have enough technology to make plastic products using a better process that generate less pollution, and we can get benefit about the plastic. We can forget about plastic whole. We need to understand the necessity to improve the technology in the process of production of plastic and recycling. And civil society must continue alerting the whole humanity about the necessity to create better conditions for everybody. In the measure that we can get an agreement between the necessity of conserve the environment for all the planet and don't use as a toilet, and the private sector understand that with better technology, continue making money and keeping safe the planet, we can continue in good way of negotiation.
Rob?
Yeah, Yeah, thank you. I kind of just want to say ditto to what he said, but no, no, I want to start by saying that these are government-to-government negotiations. It's governments talking to governments, and governments need to come together as governments and reach consensus on the final text of the agreement by the end of 2024. Then governments need to sign the agreement when we have the meeting of plenipotentiaries, and then governments will need to join it so it can enter into force. So it's a government negotiation, government to government. And then, but stakeholder engagement, as everybody said, and stakeholder consultation is incredibly important. It's going to take all of society to solve this problem. So we really need to bring all of society in to make sure that all of society is working together to solve this problem. And not one group has more strength or more power than another group in these negotiations. That's just not true, and at least in my experience and what I've witnessed. We're listening to all groups. I know that's true from the US perspective. We have stakeholder meetings. We have big stakeholder group meetings that are all inclusive, and then we meet with subsectors of stakeholder groups, and we meet with individual stakeholders. We really want everybody to be involved. We've had industry group stakeholder meetings. We've had environmental group stakeholder meetings. We've had stakeholder meetings with subnational and national and subnational, or subnational and local governments. We've had stakeholder meetings with tribal groups. We really need to bring everybody on board, and we really need to have everybody part of the solution. And that's really what we're trying to do. I just can't stress enough that it's how important it is to bring everybody to the table and make sure that everybody is being heard, because that's the only way we're going to solve this problem.
I think you mentioned something interesting there, Rob. The fact that we have consultations at home before we go to these negotiations, all these consultations where we hear everybody. I think turning the question upside down a bit, I wonder whether rather than excluding from being present at these negotiations, which might be counterproductive, I think you kind of demonize people. They are not involved, and the enforcement becomes a problem because, of course, they don't feel that they're being heard. So that can be tricky. I would turn the tables and think, well, in these national processes, can we involve at the same table private sector, NGOs, civil society, and having them, when the administrations call them to get feedback, having them sitting at the same table and also talk to each other. I think that's crucial. And in the structures that we use for these consultations, I think there's margin for improvement. I don't know so much in the US. Certainly, to actually hear everything at the same time. So they are obliged to confront each other in front of the policymakers, those governments that will be representing a position on behalf of countries. And I agree, this is a country-to-country negotiation that is happening. So I would look back at in the earlier stage. Now, another point I want to mention is, because I've been dealing with climate negotiations as well, is that these petrochemicals and these corporations, of course, they're defending their interest tooth and nail. That's understandable. Now, what they do very well is to work across conventions and across negotiations. And that is something that countries maybe should do better as well. I've been a bit self-critical here. I'm going to put an example there to you. Probably you've heard it before. In COP28, you had this, phasing out of transitioning away from fossil fuels, and that's very nice. But then you have a little thing afterwards, fossil fuels used in the energy sector. So, you talk to colleagues in the climate negotiations, this is very good results, but wait a minute, what's this energy sector thing? This energy sector means that, that you're not going to touch on petrochemicals, so the production trends for plastics are not covered by that, essentially. So were those in the climate negotiations aware of the significance of that for other major environmental problems? Because they're linked. And many corporations have the capacity to link these negotiations. And their guys know, okay, here, there, okay, there, I'm going the same thing. We need to align also as countries to tackle these problems together. I think that's crucial. Thanks.
Thank you. A lot of people feel that progress wasn't made in the first 3 inks. So if Ink 4, and I happened to read the treaty over a weekend, it was a very exciting weekend, all the options, and it was impossible to figure out if you picked option 1, would you pick option 1 all the way through, and it was let's call it complicated. So if we fail to make progress in Inc. 4, and remember, 50% of all plastics is single use, so they could make real reductions if there's the will to do it. What do you all think is the next step after that? I mean, all of us want to reach that end goal by the end of 2024. Rob, you want to start this time?
Yeah. Well, first, I think we did make progress. We have made progress. We did make progress at INC3. We actually now have that 75-page text, and it's all bracketed, but we have it, and that's progress. It was hard to get there. During INC2, there was a lot of consternation that the zero draft text didn't include the views of all countries, and so we spent a lot of time making sure that we got all views in so that we could start in INC4 at a place where we had a common text that we could work from. And so I think we have made progress. And I think our goal is to continue to make progress at INC4. I think I've talked about that a little bit already. I think we need to narrow down, we need to make that text smaller. We need to narrow down our differences. We really need to narrow them down to the few key differences that we can make progress, that we can, that are the most, contentious, where there's the most disagreement. And then from there, we need to go into the intersessional period. We need to work in the intersessional period to try and find solutions, creative solutions to where we have differences, so that when we get to INC5, we can reach an agreement. And that's really crucial. We're really, really committed to doing that. We think that now is the time, and we need to reach consensus on this text by the end of 2024. And I'm hopeful that we'll get there. I mean, I think everybody is committed to getting there. So.
You want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I cannot agree more. But for that, we're going to need serious intersessional work. I think what's been missing here, and why, yes, we have achieved, but we're certainly late. I mean, I'm not gonna hide that from you. I think there's much to do, because this is when the push comes to shove. Really, the nitty-gritty of the details. There are big details, We're talking about substances of concern. We're talking about human health. We're talking about uses that are absurd of plastic, like cutlery, stuff like that we have banned in the EU in 2021, by the way. All this stuff needs to come together with experts talking frankly about them and bringing up solutions, cutting down on the text and choosing options. This needs to be part of intersessional work. And the fact that we haven't had intersessional work is showing up now as a big delay. We cannot delay that anymore. I think the EU is going to be very adamant that from now on until the 5th Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, we need that intersessional work. That's clear.
We think that we are optimistic about the next negotiation. We believe that all parties involved have enough scientific evidence and economic understanding that we can and we need make an agreement in binding instrument, because it's possible keep safe the planet and making industry working, because we need the industry. And after 3 negotiations before, I think this is the time is now. The planet, the human health, the One Health can't wait for more time. The pollution is a reality. It's not a fiction. I'm optimistic that in the next negotiation we can get the instrument after the progress in 3 negotiations before.
So, from the UK's point of view, as similar to the US and the EU, 2024 should be our deadline. We're working quite strongly to get all the work finished by then. We do think, loads of progress has been made so far. Long text, 7-something pages. It's been slow, but we needed to consult and get everyone together. Intersessional work, technical work in between Inc. 4 and Inc. 5 is paramount, and we'll be pushing for that. But the UK has done some stuff also. If we don't get intersessional work across the line, we, along with Brazil, have actually led an informal technical dialogue on actually the work on problematic plastic products. And we've brought together technical experts together to actually advise and do a lot of work before upcoming inks. So if we don't have that mandate and it's not agreed, we do believe we should work with like-mindeds to actually create informal working groups like the UK-Brazil working group to actually make sure that we can, with or without an agreed intersessional work in between Ink 4 and Ink 5, we go with a very strong position with the high ambition countries and also countries that are not there, and actually come with a more streamlined text that we can kind of push forward as we finalize this by the end of 2024. But end of 2024 is still the goal and what we're moving towards.
Thank you. My last question, and I must admit, it might be in the draft treaty. I fell asleep at about page 69, 70. How seriously are your governments really taking the plastics and human health, and will you push the plastics industry to be made financially responsible for the health crisis pollution from their products are causing? In the US, we have principle, I think all the countries here do, of polluter pays. Do you think that will ever be part of the treaty?
Okay, Panama recognized the severity of global plastic pollution. And we are working in two sides, in the domestic field and international field. For example, at the national level, since approximately 10 years, we are working in making laws about the use of plastic. For example, in 2018, we approved a law that promotes the reusable bags in the commerce and trading sites. We are the second country in Latin America after Chile in adopt this kind of law. For Panama, it's very important to take action about the plastic pollution because we have 50% of a marine protected area, and the plastic travel directly to the seas. For Panama, the sea important is critical, and so we need to protect the sea against the plastic pollution. Also, in the national level, in 2020, we approved another law that regulates the reduction and replacement of single-use plastic products. The cutlery and many other plastic use, and we are take action to reduce and forbid some use of these products. And since 2022 to 2027, we approved a national marine waste plan with the support of International Marine Organization and the United Nations Environment Program. And we are working to enhancing research, development, and innovation, and mobilizing resources in create action from civil society, government, private sector, obviously, to reduce the pollution, marine pollution. Also, Panama have the greater maritime registry in the world, so we are a big responsibility. We have a big responsibility about all vessels that move in the seas. Also, in the international field, since 2022, we participate in the High Ambition Coalition, led by Norway and Rwanda. Last month, we received in Panama a delegation from Chile, Colombia, El Salvador, Argentina, to take note about the position of Latin American country in the next negotiation in Ottawa. Last year, at December 2022, 23, Panama launched a platform where the private sector and government authority and civil society and academia get information about the level of pollution and the way that every actor, civil society, coastal marine community, authorities, and private sector can reduce in his daily activity the pollution about plastic. This platform received the support from United Nations, many international ONGs, Panama never stopped to work in fight about plastic pollution. And the commitment is strong. We are the side. It's the position of Panama and many other countries in Latin America to the necessity to get a binding agreement this year.
Thank you.
I would think in the European Union we're extremely serious about the Global Plastics Agreement. The resources that we are employing for these negotiations are unparalleled for this type of subject and format. We have, of course, 27 member states with their own legislation in certain aspects of that, and we are enriched, actually. We embrace the very many solutions that we have in 27 countries. I want to actually acknowledge the role of Sweden, hosting this event, but also because they are part of the Bureau of the negotiations, as well as Estonia. So 2 of our member states have a key role. The US is also part of the Bureau and others. A key role in the negotiations. So you can see we play at EU level, also at EU member state level, and specifically I want to point at the polluter pays principle. 3 very short, very nice words: polluter pays principle. Makes sense. This is in the EU treaties already. For us, it could be easily transported into this negotiation. It should be there. It should be there. In Article 192 of the EU Treaty, you have polluter pays principle. And this is fleshed out in many of the regulations that we have adopted, or we are in the process of adopting at the EU right now, as we speak. Eco-design, packaging waste directive. Behind all that, even a fee. We have a tax. Not many people know this. We have an EU-established tax for plastic that is not recycled. If a member state doesn't recycle much, pays more into the coffers of the EU. So we got these elements, that flesh out what polluter pays mean, and I think we're going to bring that strongly to the table. So we take this challenge very, very seriously.
So just to agree with my colleagues on the panel, the UK also agrees with the polluter pays principle. Not only internationally but domestically, we have it in law, and we are working by 2025 to actually strengthen our laws within the UK to ensure that we have the polluter pays principle applied. So in the treaty text also, we are pushing for the same or similar text, and to ensure that this goes on and polluter pays internationally. So just to say, we agree with that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, when I hear you ask this question, I hear you talking about extended producer responsibility. And I think probably everyone in the room knows that we don't have national legislation that allow a national extended producer responsibility regime. But a number of states are doing that, and we're hearing calls for more federal involvement in extended producer responsibility. And we're hearing those calls, and we're taking them seriously. We really agree that we need to be focusing on these issues and how we bring the private sector into the equation, and how we can implement, how we can encourage extended producer responsibility, even though we don't have federal legislation to do that. And we think that we think there needs to be provisions in the agreement too that discuss extended producer responsibility, because that's going to be part of the solution. Again, we don't have national legislation around it, but that doesn't mean that we can't do it. We can do nothing. We need to engage in the federal government level as well on this issue. So.
Yeah, and we are seeing the industry in a little teeny way advertising a lot about how they're going to take back every bottle or every bag or whatever it is they're doing, and it's really unrealistic. But
we're hearing the same thing. We're hearing a lot of industry being very engaged on this issue, implementing their own extended producer responsibility schemes, and it's not just the state and local governments; it's also industry that's implementing their regimes. And we strongly encourage that. We hope they work. We also encourage their separate accountability. They've set up their own sort of accountability systems that are independently verified often, and I think that's also important and crucial. So, we're behind that. So,
right. Well, you've done a great job so far. Okay, now how much time do we have? Anybody know before the next panel starts? Anyway, why don't we try and take at least 2 questions from the audience? Go ahead, right here.
Hi, thanks for doing this. Thank you. I'm Kelly Lunny with Bloomberg Government. I wanted to know where the U.S. stands on production caps on plastics.
Well, we don't support production caps per se, but we support demand side reduction of plastic pollution. We think we don't have legislation to support production caps. We want to be part of this treaty. We think we need to be part of the solution, and so we support reduction in production, but we don't have legislation, to support production caps. So.
What does that look like, though? Reduction in plastic?
Well, I think there's all sorts of things we can do. We can, government procurement for starters. We can also, focus on reuse. We can focus on innovation. One of the things I haven't talked a lot about here is innovation, and I think innovation is a huge part of the answer. And we're spending a lot of money on innovation and in the innovation space. Innovation in design that we've talked about here, and design of products, innovation in materials use, innovation in reuse systems and how we do reuse, innovation in waste management. I think innovation is really going to be part of the solution here. And our Department of Energy is doing amazing work in this space that's really hopeful. And so I think we have the same ambition. So I think we have the ambition of ending plastic pollution, and we need to do it in a way that that works for us legally, but that also has impact, that achieves these results. I mean, we all have the same ambition to end plastic pollution.
Does anybody from want to talk about caps on production? I know the question was directed to Rob, but I don't know.
So I think within the UK, we want to restrain and reduce the amount of plastic being produced to sustainable levels. We want to focus and push more circular economy, but we don't support caps for countries. We want each individual country within this treaty to come with what's nationally deliverable, and then hopefully have a bottom up. So if a country like the UK or a country can go a bit further, we say we should go more further. And so we are looking for, in terms of production caps, a bottom up approach rather than this treaty giving a top down mandate.
Would you like to?
We've seen that everything is subject to investigation and prove the viability. If maybe it's possible, establish caps, but we need a necessary study about the issue, but it's not impossible yet.
Yeah, and I mean, and also look at how long it took, how many years it took to get phase out of fossil fuels in a treaty. I mean, like, amazing.
I'm just going to say one thing. I mean, production trends right now are, doubling, tripling by 2040. The amount of plastics that we are producing right now in 2024. This is 16 years ago. 16 years from now. 16 years from now, we might end up having twice or 3 times as much production as now. It's just not sustainable. And I don't see a way out of this except, ban, phase out certain absurd uses of plastics. In the EU, we have banned 10 plastic uses, plastic objects for which there are inexpensive substitutes. One way or another, the supply side needs to come in here. We cannot have 3 times as much plastic in 16 years.
So, sorry, I just want to add. One of the other aspects here is that this is one of the most contentious issues in the negotiation. It's one of the hardest parts of the negotiation. And in our view, we need to get to yes here. And so we need to come up with solutions and we need to be inclusive. We really need the whole world to be involved in this treaty. We need to get all of the nations involved. We need to get the producers. We need to get the consumers. It's going to take everybody to solve the solution and solve this. And this is one of the most contentious issues. And so, we think we need to be flexible so that we can bring everybody on board and then start and strengthen. I think I heard the ambassador say that in the beginning, and I think that's something that we really support and are on board with. So.
Yeah, I mean, even Earth Day, our theme is that our entire focus is to educate the public because we need everyone. I saw an EU study that said 60 or 70% of people from the EU did not know plastics, and I considered an incredibly informed public, did not know plastics was made out of oil. We have a long way to go. And so we're also here to support and annoy you all. That's our job, and to be tough about things. But we do have a big education role ahead of us, all of us do, in order to bring the public. So, and that in turn will put more pressure on the negotiations. Next question. In front? Yes. Sorry, somebody jumped up. Okay.
Sorry.
In the yellow.
Linda Molnar, U.S. National Science Foundation. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that were mentioned. First, Rob's comments on innovation, right? So as a funder of R&D innovation at NSF, I really see that as part of the solution. And production caps are a contentious topic for obvious reasons, right? So is there a way to use innovation to innovate to a better place for the environment and for human health, and a way to work together? Because I understand it's a government-to-government negotiation here, but it's really about the producers and shifting from what they're doing now to a vision for a different future to produce the products that we need to exist as a modern society that we are. Many of those products which do contain plastics. I wholly agree with what Manuel is saying. Right? We've got to get chemicals of emerging concern out of these products, right? But isn't that the primary concern with the plastics in our production, right? And also, of course, decreasing production. But you've got to give the industry, I think, somewhere to go, right? Instead of just taking and saying, okay, we're going to stop production, right? Where can they go towards producing things in a different way? And so then if anyone on the panel can explain, we did mention briefly about government procurement. I think that's another way to come in, and governments can really make a difference. So if anyone had more information about the Greening Government Initiative, because I'm a proponent of circular design and circular economy, and I think that's a way that governments can join together, and they already have done some work to make this shift towards a different world.
Okay, how do you all respond? We all love innovation, but how realistic is it to match this up in parallel? How much work is the industry doing, or the government's doing?
If I may, I think innovation, I'm just going to add one note on the word innovation. To me, innovation means innovation in technologies, of course, to do things better, but also innovation in policies. Also innovation in business models that might reduce the supply because there's a business opportunity in something that doesn't use plastics. So here, the problem also is that for many of these producers, this is a very profitable business. Yeah. So why should I innovate with new business models, or why should I support innovative policies if what I'm doing is making me rich? Now, and everybody else in trouble. So it is actually crucial to look not only about technologies, but also, I think, about policies, business model innovation, the incentives to have innovation on those as well.
Yeah, I mean, and when you read the Wall Street Journal, which I love to hate, but anyway, it talks about where these stranded, now that you added the words phase out to the climate agreement, they're all looking, they're projecting moving all those potentially stranded assets into plastic. So I agree with you. But on the other hand, necessity is the mother of invention. If the treaty is tough, if it could ever be tough, and could add the words phase out, even if it takes a couple years, then innovation will follow. But I don't know if you all agree.
In the case of Panama, the National Plastic Action Platform is an example from innovation, but this innovation is result the joint work from the academia and scientific community of Panama, that the scientific community informed the government, and government open a dialogue and invite private sector and civil society and community, and government put the resources, technology resources, and every stakeholder interchange information and create new design about, for example, in the private sector, design of manufacturing process related to plastic products. In the education sector, it's very important create awareness since primary school to the university and postdoctoral studies. In the community, it's very important the understanding that the correct management of plastic, the recycling process, and reduce the use of plastic. And the innovation is possible, and in the way that every stakeholder work together, we can get better results, innovating education policies, manufacturing process, also legislative instrument, law and regulation.
Rob,
Sure.
off the top of your head, do you have
Yeah.
any idea how much money? I mean, DOE is unbelievably
Yeah, well, I
rich
mean,
these days, but how much are they putting into coming up with new
Good
substitutes?
question. I don't have a number for you. I don't have a number, but there's a lot of money going into it, and there's a lot of money from the Infrastructure Act, and there's a lot of money from the Inflation Reduction Act that's going into these spaces, and the U.S. has a strong history of regulations that push innovation. I think that's an important part of this. Where we have legislative authority, I think that's something that we're looking at. With respect to government procurement, I agree that's a super important issue, a super important question. I know that our General Services Administration issued, I think, an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, and maybe Linda knows more than I do. I'm doing this, so don't quote me here, but that noticed a rule that it was considering to phase out purchasing of single-use plastics in government procurement. And so I haven't gotten the latest on that. I don't know exactly where that stands, but I think that is a really good start because the U.S. government is a huge producer of goods and services, and if we can start there, that in itself will, I think, make a dent. So. And I don't have an exact number. I'm sorry, but there is a lot of money going into it through across the U.S. government. So.
Yeah, and we've been reading a lot about it. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of money.
Yeah, I mean, I know the U.S. State Department, we have started the End Plastic Pollution International Collaborative that I talked about, and that's going to focus on innovation. It's going to focus on convening, and it's going to focus on implementing programs and projects on the ground that are the outcomes of some of the innovation work that we're doing. And we've committed up till now $15 million, which I know is not very much, but it's what we can do. And in this budget climate, even getting anything is a lot for the State Department. And we're hoping to plus that up this year. I can't make promises, but that's what we're hoping to do. And we're hoping to get the private sector and philanthropies and others to contribute as well so that we can leverage additional resources. So. We're also hoping other governments come in and join EPIC and become part of the solution here. I mean, and partly we're doing EPIC because we need to start this now. This negotiation is happening is happening now, but it's gonna be finalized. We're gonna finalize the text in the end of the year. There's gonna be another 6 months before it's open for signature, and then it's gonna be a few years probably before it enters into force. And we can't wait that long. We've got to do things now, and so that's why we've started this public-private partnership. And we have some of our partners here. We have someone from the Ocean Foundation, I see. We have, and our other partners are IUCN and the Aspen Institute and Serious Business. They're the hosts of this public-private partnership. So this is something we're focusing on immediately, and we're making progress immediately. We're trying to make progress immediately. So.
Well, given the next treaty negotiations or during Earth Week and Earth Day, we'll hope you make some progress. You get the last word.
So from the UK's point of view, we are doing quite a lot from the UK government. We are trying to actually bring together not only businesses to actually focus on innovation, but also the academia side. And we're doing quite a lot in terms of putting some funding towards like pilots, so that businesses and academia can kind of work together and find the most innovative solution possible. We believe in putting forward policies that kind of pivots the business models to be more sustainable. As I said earlier, we have the extended producer responsibility coming into force, and we're pushing that out by 2025. And finally, we are quite keen that we have the private sector put a lot of finance into this. So how do we work to create business models in which can finance the circular economy and make sure that we can reduce the use of plastic is where the UK government is trying to go. And obviously, we're trying to use our mighty might of the UK government to procure green. And there's a whole greening government strategy that the UK is moving towards. And the UK is moving not only in terms of plastics, but also energy. And we're trying to be a net zero government.
I think we are sad. Well, sir, you've been up. You've had your hand up first. Well, I know, but well, okay, the gentleman in front. What? You? Yes. Susan, stand up and no, the man right here. Oh, the microphone. Oh. There we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet, Emerald Planet TV, and this goes to education. This is one of the things that you were bringing up, Madam Moderator, and we've heard a little bit about that, but not that much, because we were looking at civil society being part of this whole process. And if we don't have the civil society either advocating for or requesting changes in the products that they're actually buying, that's very difficult to do, but it's bottom up. When bottom up means K-12. And so how do we get the schools involved across all these different nation states to really be even more serious about how we're going to advocate for the change? Because if business doesn't see the business opportunity because of the clamor from the public, they're going to continue to, the same old, same old. So how do we embed education and the rules and regulations, but also the opportunities? And thank you for being here today.
Yeah, I'd like to just sort of jump in here. So Earth Day runs probably the largest global climate education effort in the planet. We've been negotiating with UNFCCC, the EU, and just about everybody else too, because we really believe, both from an equity point of view and an education point of view, that climate change needs to be embedded in K through 12 in every subject. The science isn't that hard, and our goal is innovation, entrepreneurism, because we believe that business and people will probably end up doing a better job solving the climate crisis. We do in the US, Canada, Germany have federated systems. We can't get any state to agree to do anything. They have to do it themselves. And so, but on plastics, it's the same story. You're not going to be able to integrate it. But individual schools, particularly around Earth Day, but other times during the year, they're trying to phase out single-use plastics. Is there education on the importance yet dramatic health problems and waste management problems of plastics? Almost nowhere. The EU is a little bit of a step ahead. I don't know where Panama is, but I agree with you completely that education is key, because we're political democracies and they respond to people. And if you don't teach them to vote on the environment, then we'll have people in office and state departments and whatever around the world that aren't responding because they don't have to. But I'd love to, we don't all, I know we're close to, we're really out of time, so anybody like to jump in? By the way, state's been incredibly helpful on.
Just to flag that, we've been engaging with your
Right.
Earth Day Education Director to see how the UK Embassy and we can work with you guys to kind of share the education point of view going forward. So we're probably going to host something in our embassy in the next couple of months,
Right.
Bringing together champions from across.
We visit everybody, so.
Yeah.
Panama, I don't know I can't remember off the top of my head your environmental education policies.
Okay, education policy is a universal necessity, and it's understand that without education, with the knowledge of everybody, every people, it's impossible the development better habits of production and consumption. And if we don't understand that the planet is just one, we don't have a second planet. We can create the necessary instrument, but it's not an issue of just an instrument that obligate to accomplish a law. It's the understanding, it's the conviction that it's necessary keep safe the planet and conserve the human health. And education is the best way to deliver this information to every population in the world since the primary level to go ahead. And we are optimistic that in the next negotiation, we get the instrument.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists, contestants, if you will, for coming today. I really appreciate it because you're all on the hot seat and you did a more than adequate job. So thank you very much.
Hey everyone, my name is Aidan Sharon. I'm the Director of End Plastic Initiatives at EarthDay.org. The official organizer of Earth Day since 1970, and this year our theme is Planet versus Plastics. I'm happy to be moderating this panel, Perspectives from Civil Society. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel so no one will miss the eclipse because of me. So at the end we have Julia Cohen, the Managing Director of Plastic Pollution Coalition. Next to her is Dr. Jamala Jin, Science and Policy Advisor for Break Free from Plastic. Next, we have Rachel Ordvani, the Environmental Health Campaigner at Center for International Environmental Law. And finally, Dr. Luis Estevez, Associate Director of International Government Relations at Ocean Conservancy. Thank you all for being here. Take a seat. So, Julia, I'd like to start with you. So as we head into these negotiations, how much participation and access has civil society had with government delegations? And have you been effective at influencing delegates towards achieving cuts in plastic production?
Thank you, Aidan, and Earth Day Network, and the House of Sweden, and the Swedish government. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with many of my esteemed colleagues and coalition members. Plastic Pollution Coalition is in our 15th year. We're the first organization solely devoted to the issue of plastic pollution. And the fact that we are here having a conversation about a global plastics treaty being negotiated is historic, is amazing, that in a time frame that is considered extremely fast and short to get to this position. You know, we're very proud of the work of so many of the groups that are part of our membership and our allies. That said, we have been involved in and advocating for, since the beginning of the initial agreement to negotiate a treaty, trying to make sure that so many of the groups that are part of our movement, the Break Free from Plastic movement, that we helped create nearly 6 years ago now, in particular, that represent frontline, fence line groups around the world, youth, indigenous, and also business innovators in alternative materials and reuse systems, et cetera, are also being heard to the same extent that many of the biggest Fortune 500, 150 petrochemical industries in the world are being heard. And I think the question is very valid because we've been attending the negotiations. We have felt mostly not heard. We may be being listened to, but I don't think we're really being heard. And that said, like, we don't have time. The panel this morning, I think, was an indication of that there's individual personal commitment and political will to a certain degree, but governmental political expediency and that kind of political will, especially in our own country in the United States, is not as strong or sufficient to, I think, help save humanity. And the public health issues, the environmental justice issues, the human rights issues are totally intertwined and intersectional with the planetary crisis of climate as well. Plastic is oil. And that's why the Plastic Pollution Coalition nominated the High Ambition Coalition for the Earthshot Prize this year. So I'll leave it at that for now and pass it to back to you. Thank you.
Jamala, now we saw a lot of press from INC3 about the fossil fuel companies having over 200 lobbyists at the negotiations, some even sitting at the table. How did that make you feel?
I think it's a problem. And I think, You know, honestly, it's a twofold problem because on the one hand, the presence of so many industry lobbyists pulls down a number of human health considerations that we have in the treaty negotiation process and the human rights considerations that we have in the process, and it at the same time, you know, promotes a lot of sort of geopolitics and corporate profits, to be quite frank, false solutions as the way out. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about innovation today. Well, you know, there was also a report that just came out of Norway that said that in plastic we have over 13,000 chemicals, and 3,600 of them are as yet subject to any international regulatory framework. So as we're talking about innovation, we're talking about simplifying the chemicals and producing more sustainable plastics, and also putting the plastics in, having a circular economy that includes plastics, AKA plastic circularity. We're really just talking about years upon years upon years of taking 13,000 chemicals and plastics and trying to go down to 10, years upon years upon years of circulating 13,000 toxic chemicals into the so-called circular economy. And meanwhile, you know, all of that innovation is taking place 3 to 10 miles away from Black people, from Indigenous people, from Latina people in this country that are being poisoned and that are suffering from the human health impacts of plastic production. There is no design out there right now for a plastic that is not environmentally persistent and that does not persist in the human body. You know what that material is called? It's called glass. It's not plastic at all. Plastic does not belong in the circular economy simply because the amount of time that it will take for us to actually do chemical simplification and similarly to innovate, you know, some of these waste management, waste to energy schemes that are being promoted, it is simply going to be too long. And the frontline and fence line communities that Julia mentioned do not have time to wait. And, you know, towards the geopolitical aspect of this, I mean, I have to disagree with, respectfully, the gentleman from the State Department on a couple of questions. You know, number one, we've all seen in INC3 that there have been, you know, fossil fuel producer countries that have been kind of stalling the process. They've been representing, you know, a kind of like-minded group and lowering the ambition of the process. I would say that, you know, this is one form of low ambition in the negotiations. Another form is the kind of low ambition that industry introduces by promoting these kinds of false solutions in the treaty negotiation process for their economic gain. And, you know, oftentimes this gives member states a very disingenuous way to look like they are pursuing high ambition in the treaty negotiations when really they're just promoting plastic circularity, chemical recycling, other false solutions that are not scientifically proven and do not put human health and human rights considerations front and foremost. If we simply protect human health and the environment using the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, the bedrock environmental statutes that we have in this country to secure environmental justice and to protect fence line and frontline communities, commitments that the Biden administration has made via Executive Order 1408 and 14096, we will reduce plastic production and actually protect human health and the environment. And industry is not, their presence in these negotiations is totally undermining that.
Rachel, do you agree?
100%. I think, you know, as one of the panelists mentioned on the previous panel, you know, industry, this is making them money, and if they aren't pressured to change, if they aren't required to change, why would they? And I think that, you know, that as Jamala mentioned, they've been making money off of the suffering and pain and health impacts on, you know, communities around the world, and very specifically Black and Brown and Indigenous communities in this country and communities across the world, including in the Global South. who are suffering from the impacts of both production and the waste management side of plastic pollution and plastic production. Yeah.
Louise, to follow up, what strategies has civil society organizations such as Ocean Conservancy employed to mobilize diverse stakeholders in supporting actions to address plastic and plastic pollution?
Thank you for the question. I think I'm going to be a little bit repetitive here because I feel that this question has been addressed already. There is the need to actually have all the voices included, all the relevant stakeholders as part of these discussions. Ocean Conservancy, of course, has a long-standing history of actually driving processes like the International Coastal Cleanup that allows us to have this extensive network of contacts around the world that we can use to actually inform partners on how these negotiations are moving forward. We also have the Global Ghost Initiative that resides actually also as part of Ocean Conservancy that we use to inform governments and fisheries and other stakeholders on how to engage in the process. But let me give you another example that I think is critical. When we actually talk about product redesign, system redesign, we're talking about making plastics more easily to be reused or recycled. And in that sense, waste speakers from the informal sector are quite relevant voices because they are responsible for 60%. It is estimated that they're responsible for up to 60% of the plastic, collecting the plastic that is ultimately recycled. So we need to make sure that they are represented as part of these discussions. We need to actually make sure that they have a voice and that they are considered as part of the negotiations. The text right now include actually language on waste speakers, but it's still on the bracket. Important, again, to work with stakeholders to making sure that that actually persevere over time. Let me, if you allow me, sorry, I'm gonna go beyond the question a little bit because my expertise actually is not on plastics, my apologies. My expertise is on ocean climate plastics, ocean climate agenda. I have been leading on the Front of the Ocean Climate for multiple years now, and I want to offer a clarification because it's important for this discussion. And is that the Dubai decision from COP28 actually stated that, of course, we're going to have a transition. Probably there are commitments on transitioning to more use of renewable energy, but the decision itself actually doesn't call for a phase out of fossil fuels. Actually calls for a phase down of fossil fuels, and that's an important distinction because we need to take actually action on plastics to actually reduce our dependency on these fossil fuels and eventually phasing out of these fuels and the emissions that are related to the production, but also to the consumption of other.
Thanks. Rachel, how can the countries producing the most amount of plastic be forced to take the right steps towards an equitable treaty for all? Because, as we've discussed, it's not fair for everybody. It's not equal for us all.
Yes, and just to kind of go back really quickly, it's also on the it's not equal for everybody. I also just wanted to add to what's been discussed on the petrochemical industry's influence, that this is why conflict of interest policies within the treaty, both for the scientific bodies that could be advising the treaty, for example, on what chemicals or what criteria for chemicals to phase down or phase out, and also for the treaty negotiation and implementation itself are so important. So we have the example of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which basically set up a firewall for the tobacco industry's influence into the negotiations, and it has very strict guidelines on how and when governments can interact with representatives from the tobacco industry. And so, the tobacco industry, of course, has very fundamental conflicting interests with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control to regulate tobacco, and I would argue that the petrochemical industry in this context has very similar fundamental conflicts of interest, and that should be recognized within this treaty. But now to go back to your question, it's not equal for all of the stakeholders that are in the room, to use the broad term, because there are stakeholders and there are rights holders that are in the room, but we can get into that later. But for countries, of course, as well, there are countries that produce plastics, and there are countries that don't produce plastics at all. And so I think, I would highlight, especially for, from my perspective, I'm from the US, and for a country like the US, it's not just, being forced into this, it's also a leadership opportunity for being one of the leaders in reducing plastic pollution from the get-go, from the broadest possible scope, including the production of plastics and their precursors and feedstocks. And for this, I would get a little nerdy and argue that for countries to, negotiate a treaty that's fit for purpose, which will actually reduce plastic pollution, including production, across the whole life cycle. The rules of procedure of the treaty are extremely important. For those of you that have been involved in the climate space, I personally have not, but CL as an institution has this, we've had this 30-year experience of why consensus-based decision-making does not work. We've talked about the progress that we made at the last COP, but that first of all, as we mentioned, was not enough, but it also took 30 years to even get there. And so that is, I just really want to highlight, that's why we need, the rules of procedure do include the possibility to vote, but that there are some countries that are trying to undermine that. And so I really just want to emphasize that is one of the reasons why the ability to vote is so important in the treaty negotiations and its implementation.
I'm going to leave it follow up if anybody wants to follow up what Rachel said.
I just want to say that, yeah, totally agree. And towards the point about how there is a perceived equity between civil society and industry in these conversations, no, there's not. Because to be quite frank, in the United States, within the Department of Energy especially, there are memorandas of understanding between industry and the federal agencies right now, such that the federal agencies have been pursuing and looking at support for industry-sponsored technologies as ways to address the plastics crisis. And we do not have the, political inside game or power to be able to engage with federal agencies on that level as civil society organizations. We do not have billions of dollars to bankroll new technological solutions for federal agencies to tout. All we have are the effects on our communities. All we have are the demonstrated elevated cancer and asthma rates in our communities as the advocacy for change. So no, there is not an equitable distribution of power between industry and civil society in these negotiations. And quite frankly, it makes no sense for us to be convoluted into the same groupings as stakeholders.
Can you dive a little bit deeper into how frontline communities are disproportionately affected by plastic production and plastic use? For somebody this might be their first plastic panel and they're just learning what a frontline community is and what plastic production means?
Sure. I think, I could definitely give you lots of papers and statistics for this, but I'm just going to be anecdotal here. So I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and our entire city is classified as a EPA, as a brownfield by the Environmental Protection Agency. This means that our entire city is technically considered a hazardous waste site. And the reason for that is because Detroit both has been impacted by plastic production as well as plastic disposal in the form of, on the production side, we had Marathon Oil Refinery, and this is where fossil fuels were taken to be refined and polymerized and transformed into plastics. And then on the disposal side, we had an incinerator, and we incinerated our waste for about 50 years or so before it was finally shut down. Now, both this oil refinery and incinerator dramatically impacted especially the air quality in the city of Detroit. And that has resulted in a disproportionate rate of cancer and asthmas in the city. And any place where you have fossil fuel extraction, refinement taking place, you generally see elevated rates of cancers and asthma. This is true of Cancer Alley in the Gulf South. This is true of Texas. This is true of the Ohio River Valley. And this is true of Detroit, Michigan, where I'm from. And when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, of course, those cancers and those asthma rates manifested as comorbidities of the COVID pandemic. So that is actually why Detroit's death rate was so disproportionately high. And I can personally attest to having been affected by that, and having really lived through something that resembled, the Black Death in many ways. I mean, there were bodies piling up in the hospital hallways because we could not manage them all. That is the effect of plastic on frontline and frontline communities. That giant toxic plume of gas that you saw on the news last year when that train derailed and blew up near East Palestine, Ohio, because it was transporting polyvinyl chloride to make, plastic paints. Like, that is the effect of transporting plastic on fence line and frontline communities. And I know how much, geopolitical considerations matter here and how difficult it is to reach an agreement between hundreds of member states. But, all I am seeing in my country and in my community where I am from is communities being blown up, communities being poisoned, and a need for a greater consideration and a centering of our human health and our human rights in this treaty negotiation process. I don't know how we're going to make it happen, but we need to make it happen.
Thank you. Louise, Ocean Conservancy has a real interest specifically in plastic fishing gear being in the treaty. Can you unpack how that's being hijacked and hindered? And can you explain why it's such an important and not a small issue?
Yes, of course. And as I mentioned before, Ocean Conservancy is the host of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative. So we have actually been working this work for years. The Global Ghost Gear Initiative informs governments, also fisheries, other stakeholders on what are the most effective measures on addressing the issue of ghost gear. That's one point. The second point that I wanted to make is that ghost gear, of course, is the deadliest form of plastic pollution in the ocean. Ghost gear is designed to trap and kill marine species, and when it's lost or discarded or abandoned in the ocean, actually continues doing exactly that, entangling marine species and actually killing them. So it is important that we actually include action as part of the agreement. Also important to know that the fishing gear, actions on fishing gear are kind of done in a piecemeal approach currently. There is no global overarching framework for dealing with ghost gear. There are different processes that deal with ghost gear, like UNEP, like FAO, of course, and like IMO, but there is no global overarching process. So it is important to actually use this opportunity to actually push for these issues and actually identifying the measures that would help get us to an effective solution. In terms of those effective solutions, I think we believe that there should be language on design standards for fishing gear that include traceability and labeling, gear marking for sure, of course EPR, and of course we cannot forget about removing the ones that are already in the sea. But the agreement cannot only focus on removing the gear from the ocean, it also needs to identify those actions that allow us to prevent the gear from actually hitting the ocean.
Thanks. I'd like to pose this to everyone. Start with you, Julia. Why is it so important that the U.S. government support a strong, binding UN plastics treaty, and how does it feel knowing they're not fighting to curb plastic production?
Thank you. I just want to, in part of answering that question, say that, fishing gear, a lot of the fishing gear used to be made from natural materials, right? And not only do we need to have less plastic materials of fishing gear, because what happens to that when it's removed or even while it's being used, right? We know now the microplastics, the nanoplastics, et cetera. So it's not just about, that. Similar to, what Jamala was talking about in that there's a scientific coalition working group, and they have issued statements about the health impacts of plastics. And I think it's really important that their voices are uplifted, and I don't think, a level playing field is what this whole process needs. I mean, humans are part of the environment is part of us. We're not separate. So everything that is happening as a result of this embodiment of, the climate crisis via plastic is the result of, business as usual. We need significant systems change now, and our governments need to provide those incentives and regulations to make it happen now. So, kind of answering your question, but I think just making the point that, whether it's we need the carrots for doing the right thing, but it needs to be non-toxic, bio-benign, not false solutions, all of that.
Jamala?
I guess I have two answers. I think the first is that we are in a global crisis of international humanitarian law right now. And I think everybody knows what I'm referring to when I say that the United States is contributing dramatically to that crisis. And support for human rights considerations in a strong, binding UN plastics treaty would show some actual United States commitment to international humanitarian law, and especially to protecting the rights of fence line and frontline communities in the United States that have suffered from these disproportionate impacts of toxic pollution. And my second answer is that we need to show more global leadership on environmental issues. We are extremely behind the curve as a country. We are not party to the Basel Convention on Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste. We are not party to the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. We are not party to the other multilateral environmental agreements that are needed to really regulate plastic pollution and fossil fuel extraction in a kind of omnibus format. And so for the United States to actually meaningfully engage in the UN Environment Program and step up from its historic status as sort of an inactive observer, show some real global leadership, we need support for a strong binding UN plastics treaty.
Rachel?
It's a big question. I guess I would start by saying, there, specifically on production reduction, there is leadership from all around the world on this topic. 119 countries at INC 3 supported measures on production reduction. Many of those countries supported supply-side measures on production reduction, and I would very strongly agree with the representative from the EU on the previous panel that the supply side needs to be in there at some point. And I think, for me, it's going back also to the linking the domestic with the international, and I completely agree with the representative from the US that was saying earlier that we need action now. Absolutely, we need action on a domestic, on an international, on a local level. But this administration has already made commitments to environmental justice communities on the front lines of plastic production and the front lines of plastic waste management, all around this country. And we're not going to solve this crisis if we don't reduce plastic production. It's just not going to happen. There have been many models to show this, and we're already seeing the levels of plastics that are in the environment, in our communities, in our lungs, in placentas. Not just physical plastics, but air pollution, but microplastics. All of these things that it's too much already, and to not look at this from a supply side perspective is not going to solve the crisis. And the way that we are measuring how effective this treaty will be is not how many people sign on to it, how many member states sign on to it, but will it actually contribute to reducing plastic pollution, which is the title of the mandate to negotiate this treaty, is end plastic pollution. So if the treaty itself, the provisions in the treaty do not contribute to that, it doesn't matter how many parties sign on to it, we're not going to solve this crisis. And so I think that should be the true measurement of how effective this treaty and this negotiation is.
Finally, Louise?
I think it's a big question. I'm a cancer biologist by training, so these health issues actually are very close to my heart. But I think they have really well addressed this question. Let me just offer like an additional piece as compared to actually answering that question. I'm pivoting here. I think in terms related to stakeholders, I think it's also important to actually look at other processes, how we make sure that we're effective, we hit those ambition points. I think we need to actually start looking at what's happening in other international fora, as this relates also to impact to frontline communities, for example. There is a not perfect, but good overlap, for example, in terms of the impacts of climate and the impacts of plastic pollution. So as we push forward on identifying what are the best measures and the most ambitious agreement that we can get to, it's important to also keep in mind that there are other people working on similar issues that overlap with this. And we need to start probably thinking about a comprehensive approach on how to integrate these issues so we actually deliver the most ambitious agreement, most impactful